that's here this morning to present the changes. I know you have a full agenda, so I'm going to jump right in and just get started. Next slide, please. The first change that we're asking for is a change to the definition of retail supply dealer. The change specifically would remove convenience stores, which is already defined in Chapter 8, from the requirement to obtain the retail supply dealer license. Just a quick background on this: when auto dealers first started back in the 1940s, the only license you could get at the time was a retail supply dealer. Excuse me. And that covered everything. Well, obviously, since then, more licenses have been added, and that definition of retail supply dealer has changed since that time. Convenience stores that meet that definition sell a very small amount of automotive supplies. It really doesn't fall under the mission of auto dealers any longer, so we're asking that they be removed from the requirement to obtain an RSD license, a retail supply dealer license. Next slide, please. Something that we heard from the record industry is that they asked for a record driver trainee license. The state agency, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, already offers this. So we're asking to also add it to city ordinance. What this allows the companies to do is to have someone ride in the trucks with them so they can observe and help out on the scenes and learn the industry without necessarily going through the whole process of obtaining the full license. Kind of a trial period, they can learn the process, see if they're going to work out. So we're asking to add a record driver trainee license to the city ordinance. This particular section adds that definition. It's just an individual who, to obtain on-the-job training and experience before applying for a record driver license, holds a record driver trainee license from the city. It's a temporary license. It's 60 days. It cannot be renewed. The person is not allowed to drive. But some of the changes that are being added to the ordinance, you'll see throughout. Some of the other ordinances refer back to this one to account for them. Next slide, please. We added, just for clarification, nothing in Chapter 8 pertains to consent towing. We don't regulate consent towing in the city of Houston, so we just added non-consent to clarify that. There were some cleanup issues, just basically word changes from tow operator to auto record, very minor changes. We are asking to move the requirements that are in the equipment requirements for records. They're currently in this section 8.1-11. We're asking to move those to 8.1.26. It's just a more appropriate place for it. We're not adding any new standards, or there are no actual changes to the equipment standards. We're just moving them from one section to another section, because only records that respond to police scenes are required to have the equipment. Next slide, please. This section had no major changes. Again, it's just the minor wording changes. Next slide, please. This is the 8.1.26. This is the section for police authorized tow service agreement. These are the records that are required to have the equipment. We're talking things like shovel, flares, reflective triangles, sand to use as absorbent. These are all things that they would need when responding to a police scene or an accident. Again, these are already the equipment standards. We're just moving them to a new section. And again, wording was added to the section to account for the record driver training license. Next section, please. This section talks about the qualifications required for licenses, so we included the requirements that the record driver trainee is going to have to meet. They have to be 18 years old. They have to have a valid driver's license and a valid TDLR training license. They have to meet the criminal history standards that all record drivers have to meet in order to get a license, and they can't have any outstanding warrants. Next slide, please. Again, this talks about the application process and some of the things, it's standard things on the application, your name and date of birth, your residence, your place of birth. These are all standard things. The wording was just added to account for the record driver training license. Another change that's being asked for is a change regarding the drug testing for record drivers, and specifically PATSA record drivers. Currently, record drivers have to go through annual and random drug testing for the state and annual and random drug testing for the city. Those drug tests don't always correspond to each other, so the operators of these companies are having to pay for multiple drug tests at multiple times because they can't always use the same drug test for the state and the city. Under the new PATSA agreement, all PATSA holders have to follow the mayor's drug testing policy, and all their drivers have to be randomly, or 25% of their drivers have to be randomly tested on an annual basis, and they report that to us every 6 months. So because we're adding that random testing to the PATSA drivers, we're asking for the ordinance to specifically remove the annual drug testing for PATSA drivers when they renew. When they come and get their original initial license, they still would have to submit the initial drug test, and then thereafter they would be held to the random drug testing per the mayor's policy on drug testing. Next slide, please. This is the proposed fee for the new record driver training license. It provides a worksheet of the work that goes into getting the license. The current PATSA license is $75. We're proposing that the training license would be $30. That's good for 60 days. If that record driver wanted to come back and get a full license, within 3 months of having that training license, they would then come back and pay $45 to get the full license, the full PATSA license. Next slide, please. This section was just a cleanup. These are things that are already in state law. We're just clarifying the wording in city ordinance. It's actually no new changes to the law, and just accounting for the record driver training license. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same thing, standards of review. It's the same thing, just clarifying state law, things that are already in existence, just making it clear in city ordinance. And the same thing for the next slide, 8-137. Revocation, suspension, and refusal to renew. Also, again, we're just adding accounting for the record driver training license. Next slide, please. This is chapter 1. You're going to see this slide, and the next slide is chapter 1. However, although it's chapter 1, these issues do apply only to chapter 8. We're not asking for any changes of any other licenses or permits outside of what's handled in chapter 8. This section 1-9 actually is just a clarification. Applicants, deferred adjudication is already a consideration for applicants. It's outlined in state law and the occupation scope. We're just asking to add it to the city ordinance for clarification, but it's not a new standard they're being held to. It's just clarification in the city ordinance. Next slide, please. In section 1-10, we are asking for one change to this section, and it's specifically for a salesman license. A salesman as defined in 8-16, that's a new or used car salesman. The person, when you go purchase a car, you might get in the car with and take for a test drive. They have the same interaction and contact with the public as a record driver does. When your car gets towed, you might get in the passenger seat of the record, get a ride for your car being towed. And this standard for criminal history is already listed for record drivers, and we're asking that it also be a standard for salesman licenses, and specifically it's to add such offenses to the criminal history standards for salesmen. And it's rape, sexual assault, indecency with a child, those types of things. If an applicant came to get a license and they had a conviction for any of those sex offenses, they would be denied a license, and they would have the opportunity to appeal to the automotive board. That's, next slide is the last slide. I'll open it up to questions.